Hi, it's Rick Caesar here, and today I'm talking about reconstructive techniques, and we're talking about the technique known as laissez-faire.
Hi. So the incredible thing is you've learned all these amazing techniques to reconstruct and rebuild eyelids, and here we're going to advise you to do nothing, absolutely nothing. Basically take your hands and sit on them. Now, in order to make this in any way appealing or attractive to your patients, of course, it's very important to give it a name, and therefore you are choosing to use a technique called laissez-faire. It does make it sound enormously better than simply saying, I'm just going to do nothing. However, the key is to understand when to do nothing, and also to make sure that your patients know how long it's going to take before they get a good result, and also if they don't get a good result from laissez-faire, what you're going to do next.
So here's a patient with a basal cell carcinoma marked out and a 4mm margin marked out, and this could be treated with a number of different techniques. You could put a graft on, you could construct a rhomboid flap like this that could fold in. As I said, a graft from elsewhere could have been moved over and in. Potentially you could imagine you could do a glabella flap. There are a number of options, but if you do nothing other than wait, you can get an absolutely beautiful result. And laissez-faire should be high in your armory for lesions, particularly in this position. So when and where? Well, if you consider the eye and the eyelids, and then you consider the brow going down into the nose, you quite clearly have a lovely midline running along here. And you can also imagine the orbital rim running around like this. So for a lesion that sits, so this is for any lesion that sits here, crossing the midline, you want to consider laissez-faire. And I would argue that that includes a lesion that touches the midline, that's above the midline, or indeed a lesion that touches the midline that's below the midline. So in this zone, this is your absolutely favourite zone for a laissez-faire technique. Now, you may also consider laissez-faire for small defects of the anterior lamella. So if, for example, you've done a Hughes flap and you've pulled a Hughes flap down and there's only a small defect here, you can leave that to granulate. And as a general rule, within the orbital rim, you can have quite surprisingly good results by simply leaving it to heal on its own. Once you cross to areas outside the rim, so once you get to here or to here, etc., there's a completely different healing response, and laissez-faire is not normally going to give you anything other than an unpleasant scar. So again, a little BCC marked out, 4mm margin marked out, and again you'd think some very sensible options might include a little lateral advancement flap, which could come across this way. That might work very nicely. Again, you could fashion a rhomboid flap and fold that into position. That could work very nicely. You could borrow a skin graft again. Don't worry about this suggesting the source, it's just says the idea that a piece of skin could be taken and placed in position. But again, you don't necessarily need to do any of the above. You just remove this and sit and wait. And you can see that there's a very slight down curve here, but I think that is a very satisfying result from doing nothing. Slightly larger lesion, but again you can see it absolutely obeys this rule of crossing that midline, and the result, very pleasing indeed. Getting really quite big now, and you can see that by my rule it only just touches the midline. So this, I would have said, was a lesion at risk of a poor result, but it's still one where you can proceed with laissez-faire and see what happens. And as it happens, not bad at all. The gentleman's spectacle foot plate actually fits here, and so while there is a little bit of tractional banding there, it's not a cosmetic problem. It's almost worth going back and just reconsidering that. So that lesion can lead to that kind of result by you doing nothing. Here's a very interesting case. This patient had an unpleasant skin cancer, which needed a wide excision, which then included most of the upper lid and the lateral canthus. But the patient also suffers, unfortunately, with poor mental health and refused any reconstruction. He had capacity to refuse any reconstruction, so we weren't able to do anything. And by doing absolutely nothing, his brow dropped, the canthus tightened, but what's quite extraordinary here, and the photo unfortunately isn't brilliant, but his cornea is absolutely perfect. He's managed to keep perfect corneal clarity with us not reconstructing that at all. So, laissez-faire is perfect for everything, is it? No, it's not. And whenever you engage in a laissez-faire approach with your patients, you have to warn them that if the end result isn't good enough, you're going to proceed to other surgery. So I was quite optimistic here. I thought here we have a lesion absolutely mid-zone. It's at the larger end, but I thought this would be a good case. And initially, this is the first stage of healing. I was quite happy, but she ended up with this extraordinary band, and that is cosmetically unacceptable and needed to go back for revisionary surgery. So, if you need to go back for revisionary surgery, or indeed if you don't want to do a laissez-faire from the start, it's good to remind yourself of alternative options in this position. And so here we have our lesion, and it's actually rather larger than you may originally note. And so by the time we've put a good 4mm margin on that, and then I noted that the lesion was already causing a little bit of banding here. So I suspected that a laissez-faire approach would not be great. But I also noted that the patient had some wonderful donor skin sitting in her upper eyelids. A single eyelid wouldn't have given her enough skin to close the gap, but also if you're going to borrow some upper eyelid skin, it's much nicer to do a bilateral blepharoplasty, as the patient then benefits from the results of the blepharoplasty, as well as giving you more tissue. And you can see here that the edge of the graft is sitting there. That's the first graft, and the edge of the second graft is sitting here. And so effectively eyelid 1 donated that, eyelid 2 donated that, and that's a very nice result from a skin graft. This lesion, as a reminder, this does not satisfy the guideline, and worse still, it's outside of the orbital rim. So this lesion needed a little rhomboid flap, and that was fashioned from there to there, and then this piece gets folded in and round, and this triangle closes in that direction, and that's given a lovely result. You can just see the edge of the rhomboid scar around there. So, laissez-faire, a wonderful technique to add to your armoury. You do nothing, you sit on your hands and you wait and you wait and you wait, and then you either congratulate or indeed you reoperate. Thank you very much.